The Australian story, no matter the chapter, is an adventure story. Ancient, action-packed, precious and proud. This week, I'll trace the echoes of our adventurous spirit all the way from the shores of Sydney Harbour to the skies over the Tasman and higher again to the roof of Australia itself. Ours is a country of open roads and experiences wild and new. An adventure story that's yours for the making. For 40,000 years, the traditional owners of our great sunburnt southern land seemingly traversed its vast distances at will, guided simply by spirits and hunger, natural wanderers born of necessity. But ever since Captain James Cook parked his ship, the Endeavour, right there in Botany Bay back in 1770, the white man decided that Australia should be discovered, should be mapped and charted, and so began this nation's fascination with travel. We are dream chasers and stargazers, and the history books are littered with great Australian pioneers and daredevils willing to go as far as the flames of hell and sizzle if they must, all in the name of exploration and adventure. No matter the measure, Australia is epic. And as Australians, this immensity speaks to us daily. And no one's felt this call to adventure more keenly than Jason Beechcroft, the first person to circumnavigate the Australian mainland and Tasmania in a sea kayak. So do you remember this bit? Remember leaving from this point?
I do.
And what was the feeling like then?
A sense of relief in some regards that it was finally underway.
Yeah.
It was a hard last week, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Getting everything sorted, shutting down your life.
What makes a great adventure?
A great adventure.
Yeah.
Something that excites you, something that pushes your boundaries about what you think is possible or not possible.
This is the Southwest Cape. So once I get around that corner over there officially, I've done the West Coast.
Big milestone, yay!
For his circumnavigational exploits, Jason was named Australian Geographic's 2014 Adventurer of the Year. But if you're after an old school window into what it's like to take on the open ocean, the 7-kilometre paddle around Sydney's spectacular North Head to Manly's Shelley Beach is an adventure well worth the calluses. It's a truly magnificent sight, isn't it? Particularly from a paddler's perspective. The entrance to possibly the most renowned harbour in the world, carved out of the rock 29 million years ago. And having survived the ferocity of the seven seas, you can just imagine what Cook and those early explorers thought when they arrived here. Not only a harbour of safety and calm water, but a thing of absolute beauty. The ocean has always been a source of great freedom and passion for many Australians, but has a power that is always respected. And over the course of 17 unforgettable months, Jason, alone in his kayak, paddled our continent's entire coastline with only his guts and his wits to get him through. What constitutes the highlight of the day?
Wow, it's all sorts of different things. Sometimes the beaches and sights you'd see, or the wildlife. Hello. The sharks are curious. They learn stuff about biting things. I've technically probably had over 50 shark attacks whilst on the trip, but only 4 or 5 of them were more serious.
Whales?
Yep, the humpbacks and southern rights. I had a close encounter with one. I wasn't aware at the time that it was actually there until it jumped out of the water fully about 15 metres in front of me.
While the waters of Manly's Cabbage Tree Bay Aquatic Reserve, on the doorstep of Sydney's 4.5 million people, are unlikely to produce any humpbacks today, this little patch is known as an urban underwater environment, the envy of the world. Beneath the surface, this tiny corner of creation teems with over 160 iconic species of fish. Flamboyant blue gropers, the ever-aloof cuttlefish, and those swimming works of art, the wobbegong sharks, can all be encountered in no more than 10 metres of water. And so, with only a single day's perspective on Jason's incredible journey, down here it's easy to see why so many of us are adventurers at heart. What do you think it is about a guy like you, though, that separates you from the rest of us, whereby you will actually tackle something like this?
A willingness to fail,
Yeah.
a willingness to actually give it a shot. And I think that's important things. A lot of people won't do things sometimes, not because they're not interested in doing it, but they're really concerned that they're not going to succeed. I think there's a lot of adventures to still be done.
After the break, the adventure story that inspired a nation. The Great Australian Adventure. It's no doubt different for each of us, but an antidote to the pace and pressure of our modern lives is out there for all of us. For Jason, Australia was a hell of a long paddle, but for most of us, Australia is the country of the long drive. And it was certainly that for me. My first journey of discovery was the 59 Falcon wagon, surfboard on the roof, mattress in the back, and off up the coast. If you're Australian and you haven't done the long drive, it's almost like something's missing. It's like a pie without sauce or flake without chips. It's like scrambled eggs without the toasted slice of white beneath. It's a rite of passage. And so, in that same great spirit of Australian adventure, I've mapped out a journey for myself from the swells of Sydney Harbour to the very summit of Australia itself, Mount Kosciuszko. At just under 500 k's in this day and age, it's the kind of road trip that could be knocked off in a day's solid driving. But there was a time when our country was besieged by great tyrannies of distance, a time when it fell to man and machine to define us as a nation. A golden age of adventure, brought about by the advent of the aeroplane.
There's no bigger name in Australian aviation than Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. He was awarded the Military Cross after being shot in the skies in the First World War. He was a Hollywood stunt pilot. He was the first to do the Trans-Pacific crossing between the US and Australia. He was truly an Australian pioneer, but he was a daredevil of a sort, but a calculated one. I mean, this guy was a real adventurer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
These days, if you're out to truly taste the exhilaration of flight, Kingsford Smith style, go no further than sky racer and aerobatics pilot Chris Clark and his 1943 Boeing Spearman.
There's a level of freedom with flying that you just can't describe to someone who hasn't done it. Everything relies on you when you're out here. Just us and the element.
But to truly understand the Kingsford Smith legend, these South Coast skies can tell quite the yarn.
In 1933, Smithy decided to make the first commercial flight between Australia and New Zealand in his Fokker triplane, the Southern Cross. The plane was loaded to such an extent with crew, passengers, fuel, that he needed a runway long enough so that the plane could get into the air. And that runway is just down there.
In 1933, Sydney's mascot airfield was yet to be completed. So Smithy's search for a strip of terra firma up to the job led him to Shoalhaven Head's 7 Mile Beach. Using all his skills as an airman, he coaxed the Southern Cross gingerly down onto the beach to the sound of only his engines and the wind through his wings. I've got to admit that there was a nervous moment, and that was when we came in low. You kind of shut down the engines a bit to pull off the speed, and I look at a beach. And a beach is not normally the kind of thing that you want to land on. I know Smithy did it. He was a barnstormer, you see. But it was really, really very smooth. On that historic day, 7 Mile Beach was buzzing with thousands of locals, all keen to get a look at Smithy's legendary Southern Cross take to the skies. On the beach that morning was 5-year-old farm boy Colin Sharp.
He took off at 5 to 3 in the morning because he needed to get to New Plymouth in daylight.
How did he manage to see to take off?
Because there were flares and some cars were parked on the beach.
Oh, so the cars had their headlights on?
They had the headlights on. And of course on his starboard side, the white water was, and that was a great guide for him. And the actual flight took 14 hours and 10 minutes.
Wow. And 82 years later, Smithy's heroic feet still burn bright.
We saw the Southern Cross and we followed his other flights, and the fact that it was Smithy. He was a real legend in his time.
Next, your chance to win the ultimate adventure kit worth $100,000. I've been thinking about this word adventure, and it can mean many different things to many different people, can't it? It's personal and its effect varies. And when the spirit of adventure affects a nation, it can be inspiring, as in the case of Charles Kingsford Smith and his daring do, or it can be devastating. About 2 hours south of Sydney, in a quiet corner of New South Wales' southern highlands, lies the tranquil township of Bundanoon. But today, this little burg is on the march, with every face etched in 100 years of honour and memory. The First World War had begun and Australia had suffered catastrophic losses. At Gallipoli alone, more than 8,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers had been killed. The thrill of what many saw as the adventure of war had seriously worn thin, and a referendum for conscription had failed, so those still keen to enlist began a recruitment march. In 1915, army recruiting committees were formed in nearly every town throughout Australia. And on September the 5th, 88 men marched out of Wagga Wagga, bound for Sydney and war. The Kangaroo March, as it became known, arrived in Sydney with 222 recruits. In September of this year, descendants of the original Kangaroos will lead a march through the 28 towns of country New South Wales visited on the original trek. This is all a dress rehearsal.
It is a dress rehearsal.
Which makes it even more amazing that you got to turn out as a dress rehearsal.
Well,
it's a dress rehearsal for when?
For the Kangaroo March, we'll leave Wagga on the 5th of September and go for 5 weeks through all the little towns and goes on to the Southern Highlands. And so we're looking for direct descendants or descendants of the Kangaroo March.
Across at the Hotel Bundanoon,
No more side bets. We all in?
even the publican is recreating a genuine 1915 vibe. But for Harris Redhead, the Kangaroo March is his chance to honour his late father, Mark, who, in 1915, was the first kangaroo marcher to volunteer for an adventure from which so many of his generation would never return. So these men enlisting
Yes.
knew that the possibility of not returning was great.
Well, they must have known, but I don't think it influenced them. I think that all young fellows out to have a good time, travel the world.
Yeah.
I suspect that any aspirations he'd had of excitement and even doing the right thing by his country, you know, that sort of, I think they were all wiped pretty. I think they were pretty wiped out by the war.
Young and free, we are Australians.
As raw as the memories still are for the children of the soldiers of 1915, recreations like September's Kangaroo March ensure that the children of the 21st century never lose touch with the kinds of stories that still define us as a people. After the break, a bushwalking adventure 40,000 years in the making.
To kick off the premiere series of Australian Geographic Adventures, over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be giving away this amazing adventure kit, which we hope will inspire you to get out and explore this incredible country of ours. This majestic 2015 Sierra Off-Road Extreme comes complete with air conditioning, gas-heated hot water system, a rear ensuite, and you even get a Kamek top-loader washing machine. And it's got 15-inch alloy wheels. It's got simplicity suspension. It's got a really good Austrail chassis and very good water storage capacity too. Now, as if that's not enough, this prize even includes this Stabbycraft 1650 Fisher with Mercury outboard, Lowrance electronics and Transtyle trailer. To be in the running, just text your full name and details to 1995 2010. So, if you have any questions, all terms and conditions can be found on this website. So get busy, folks, because this amazing prize pack is going to make for some awesome adventures.
The drive from Bundanoon in New South Wales' Southern Highlands to the Snowy Mountains is only about 4 hours if you stick to the main roads. But as the country around you begins to feel more rugged, having the road less travelled all to yourself paints these landscapes in a truly ancient light. Mount Kosciuszko National Park, home to the highest mountain in Australia and to the Bundian Way, a 40,000-year-old Aboriginal pathway that was used to connect the highest part of the continent with the east coast. Finally, we've come up through the tree line to this area here where it's too cold for the trees to grow. Way off in the distance there is the coast and Eden, where the Aboriginal people used to feast on the whales, and then they'd follow the Bundian through the valley there, which they call the Big Boggy, up here along the ancient pathway. And having feasted on the whale, they climb all the way up here to feast on what we're about to discover just up here. It has taken years of dedicated research to retrace the Bundian Way's full 365 kilometres from the coast to these time-worn peaks. Home to a tiny creature for which the Aboriginal people of old would walk the entire track in search of. So this is where you find them?
Well, this is where you find the moth. This is where they normally come.
Oh, you can see a whole lot of dead ones on the ground there. According to Monaro elder Aussie Cruz, generations of Aboriginal people would journey here to gather moths in order to maintain their traditional diets. So they were quite full of fat content, wasn't it?
They're a fat content that's different to any other type of fat. You know, it's not like a red fat from red meat.
Yeah.
This was nutritious.
In spring, Huge migrations of bogong moths hibernate in these high, isolated caves in numbers of up to 17,000 every square metre.
It's like this one here. You got one there.
Oh, right, okay, so there
A lot of those.
there's still live ones in there.
Yeah.
But while the moth is integral to the Bundian story, elders like Ozzy think the track's history contains deeper lessons for all of us.
One of the things I think that the Bundian way keeps alive for us is that we as a people should unite together and care and share for the environment, and particularly care and share for our country, because we really want to see this country left in place for our children's children.
And so, as the new day breaks through the morning mists of Kosciuszko, my journey from the birthplace of modern Australia to the summit of our highest, most ancient mountain is complete. It's fabulous, isn't it? And unique. I mean, what other country has fish and coral lapping at the footpath of one of its major international cities? And what other country inspires the kind of individual that decides that since there's 2,000 kilometres of ocean between us and a neighbouring country, he should fly over it in a plane made of timber and fabric? And what other country can boast of a people that forged a journey that began as the dew formed with the dawn of time in order to feast on the fat of a moth? This is a fabulous country to discover. If my journey has fired up your wanderlust, some quality wheels are a must, so pick up a Brits camper van and roam free. The Sydney Lakeside Holiday Park has campsites starting at $39 per night. We rolled out our swags at the Shoalhaven Heads Mountain View Resort, where powered sites start at $35. And before we conquered Mount Kosciuszko, we caught some Zeds in the comfort of the Jindabyne Discovery Holiday Park, where sites start at $27 per night. For this information and more about this week's Australian Geographic Adventures, log on to australiangeographicadventures.com.au. On next week's show, Caroline Pemberton and I explore northeastern Victoria's alpine country. From up on high...
It's absolutely spectacularly beautiful up here.
...and in low gear.
Holy smoke. He has just disappeared on a 90-degree angle.